they all agreed, shouting in unison, before exchanging intimate details. Gunnar was the first to speak, confessing his love for Gimle, Stenar's second daughter, with reckless abandon. "When she talks," he exclaimed, "her words sound like the gentlest harp tones, and her lips emit the fragrant scent of Caspian roses or our own flowers." Filled with fervor, he proclaimed, "Raudasandur brothers, I tell you that honey tastes sour in comparison to Gimle's sweetness." The brothers erupted into laughter and cheers. Then Ingunn chimed in, revealing his love for Agnetha, the eldest daughter of Hreidar of Fylkir. "The goddess Sjofn has brought us together, and I have promised that nobody shall marry her unless they defeat me in combat," he declared. "We will support you, Ingunn," shouted the Raudasandur brothers. Sigmund spoke next, confessing his love for Solveig the Fair, so called for her beauty. Despite her gentle and shy demeanour, her grace and allure did not escape Sigmund's notice. She was the daughter of Bjorn Hreidar, who ruled over a vast territory near the temple in Gaular. Sigmund had fallen for her during an autumn sacrifice when they first met, and now, at Uppsalir, their love had only grown stronger. "I knew," Gunnar interjected, turning to Ingunn, "that you were in love with Agnetha, and I could see how she preferred you over everyone else who pursued her, even if others didn't notice." He added, "As the saying goes, the eyes cannot hide if a woman loves a man or if a man loves a woman." Ingunn replied, "Gunnar, I could say the same thing about you. The three Raudasandur brothers noticed how much you and Gimle are in love with each other." After teasing Sigmund, he remarked, "Many men behave strangely when in love, but don't fault men for that. Blame love instead." The Raudasandur brothers addressed Sigbrit in unison, inquiring about the maiden he loved. They acknowledged his deep admiration and respect for women and his love for their company. Sigbrit responded, revealing that in his travels across various lands he had yet to encounter the woman destined to be his wife. He has loved a few maidens, but the Nornir had not ordained their paths to cross, and thus he remained unmarried. The Raudasandur brothers implored Sigbrit to marry as he was the only surviving member of his kin. They urged him to secure a progeny to carry forth his virtues and legacy. After their conversation, each brother went their separate ways, including Gunnar, who strolled absent-mindedly towards Gimle's bower. As fate would have it, he saw her approaching him on her way to her father's house. He felt a surge of delight when he saw her and caught her eye. She blushed and paled as she recognized him. She could sense what was coming. An inexplicable feeling took over her, warning her that Gunnar was about to propose. The attendant that followed Gimle lagged behind as she and Gunnar continued walking together. After a brief pause, Gunnar began speaking, reminding Gimle that the goddess Var took heed of men's oaths and the private vows shared between lovers, and that she punished those who broke them. He wanted Var to bear witness to their conversation that day and listen to what Gimle needed to say. He gazed intensely at her before continuing, "Do you remember when we first met, my dearest maiden?" Gimle responded, "Yes, like it was only yesterday." "Gimle," Gunnar said, "do you recall how we gazed into each other's eyes when we first met, and it seemed as though we were one and our souls were entwined? At that moment, I felt something indescribable, a stirring that I had never experienced before. I loved you, and I thought you loved me in return. As you continued on your way, my gaze followed you, and just before you vanished from view, you turned your head as if by some magical force, a silent acknowledgement that I still held your heart captive with just a single glance. We exchanged a farewell glance, silently promising each other that we would reunite again." Gimle nodded in affirmation, unable to deny the truth of those fleeting moments. "Since then," continued Gunnar, "you have haunted my thoughts day and night. I dream of you when I sleep. I feel compelled to declare my love for you before I return to Dampstadir. Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Without you life holds no appeal. The clanging of swords on the battlefield, the call to glory and renown, none of it matters without you by my side." Gimle's heart swelled with emotion, too overwhelmed to form words. She reached for his hands, looked at him with her deep blue eyes, and whispered, "Gunnar, my heart belongs to you alone. No other man shall ever possess me." Later that evening, the Raudasandur brothers gathered together, as was their custom, to discuss their plans before attending the banqueting hall to drink with the noblemen and champions of the land. They agreed that they would seek the approval of the bride's parents before moving forward with the wedding. The Vikings held marriage in the highest regard, and would not tolerate any disrespect to the honor of their kin. Chapter 28. Betrothal of Gunnar and Gimle. The morning after, Gunnar made his way to meet with his uncles Randver and Visbur. They were both kinsmen from his mother's and father's side, respectively. While they travelled with him to Uppsalir, Gunnar shared his intentions. "Kinsman, I desire you to ask for me in marriage Gimle, the second daughter of Steinar, the Hreidar of Fylkir." His uncles nodded in unison. "Well done, Gunnar," they praised him. "Thou art wise in thy choice, for Gimli is beautiful and accomplished in all that pertains to a woman. She shall be a worthy wife for thee. She is one of the greatest matches in the northern lands, and we sincerely hope that both she and her father will consent to your union." They added, "I have told Gimle how much I love her, and she has said that no one shall ever marry her but me," Gunnar replied. That afternoon, the two uncles of Gunnar made their way to Steinar's estate. Visbur stepped forward as their spokesman. "Kinsman, we have to talk to thee about a very important matter," he began. Steinar inclined his head, inviting them to continue. "We are allied to thee by blood and kinship, and we wish to furthermore closely cement our friendship. Therefore we have come to ask for the hand of thy second daughter, Gimle, for Gunnar. Thy daughter is high-born, and of all the pedigrees of the Uppsalir families, hers is the highest, for she is directly descended from the gods themselves. We wish, if it is thy pleasure, that Gunnar should be thy son-in-law," Visbur requested. After a brief pause, Visbur proceeded. "Gunnar is valiant, has been in many battles, travelled far and wide, and is, we think, very wise for his age. More than all this, Gunnar loves thy daughter Gimle, and we think it will be a happy union for both our families. It will cement the friendship that exists between Hrafn and Fylkir." Steinar was pleased with their request. "I know that there will be no disparity in the match, for both Gunnar and Gimle are of Odin's kin. Gunnar is a renowned warrior and rules over one of the powerful realms of the north." The path to marriage between Gimle and Gunnar Hjorvardsson seemed free of obstruction, as they were distant relatives by blood, only related in the 5th degree. The Norsemen had long followed this wise law, ensuring the preservation of their heritage. Steinar, however, was not willing to betroth his daughter without her consent, despite her young age of 15 years. Under the law, she was of age, and as a landowner, Gimle could choose her own husband, albeit with Steinar's blessing. Yet before any such conversation could happen, Steinar insisted that they were in agreement with regards to the property conditions of the marriage. Gimle possessed substantial entailed lands, including a third of her mother's inherited properties, which were sure to bring her great wealth. Marriage was a civil contract, and as such, they needed to be clear on the terms, including the dowry and the home following. Steinar reminded them that, under their land's laws, a woman must have a dowry to validate the marriage, and that dowry, along with the counter-dowry, was hers for life. Her husband could not touch it. Ultimately, if the two were in agreement on these points, there were no barriers to their union. Even Gimle's brothers, fighting in the Mediterranean, would be delighted to hear of their sister's marriage to their distant cousin and comrade, Gunnar Hjorvardsson. If Gimle dies without having children, her estates will go back to her family. However, her dowry must be returned to her husband, and she's entitled to a third of the property that her husband earned during their marriage, both real and personal. "You speak fairly," said the uncles. "Gunnar will give Gimle the estates of Bjolstad, Lis, Hof, and 500 gold marks as dowry." "I accept this dowry," answered the Hreidar of Fylkir. "What counter-dowry will you give to Gimle?" inquired the uncles of Gunnar. "I'll give her the large estate of Rodulsvellir and 500 gold marks," replied Steinar. "You are generous," said Visbur and Randver. "We won't discuss the trousseau that Gunnar should give Gimle, as we know he's most generous, and takes great pride in his rank and dignity. He wants Gimle to have an outfit befitting the daughter of the Hreidar of Fylkir." Gimle was called, and Steinar said to her, "I have a marriage proposal for you, my daughter. I didn't want to betroth you without your consent. What do you think of marrying Gunnar Hjorvardsson, the Hreidar of Hrafn? There could be no better match for you in all of the northern lands." "Father, no one could please me more," Gimle replied. "The goddess Var has heard our vows, for Gunnar and I love each other." Then Gunnar was summoned to the meeting, and Steinar spoke to him. "I wouldn't give my daughter to you, Gunnar, if I didn't like you. I prefer you to any other man in our lands to marry Gimle, for I consider you to be the most courageous, daring, and intelligent person." Gunnar thanked Steinar for his kind words, and his approval of his marriage to Gimle. Once all the conditions were agreed upon, each side called 6 men of high rank, and they recited the terms of the marriage before them, as the law required. The men stood as witnesses of the agreement, It was decided that the betrothal would last no more than 12 months, unless unforeseen circumstances arose. Stennar then said to Gimle, "As your father and guardian, I betroth you according to the law. It's a complete betrothal." Gunnar stepped forward towards Stennar, who announced that Gunnar was officially engaged to Gimle, his daughter. Witnesses were called upon to confirm the betrothal. Gimle then came forward and spoke. "Gunnar, as you stand in front of these witnesses, you have lawfully betrothed yourself to me. Please give me the counter-dowry and clasp my hand in agreement for the fulfillment and performance of the betrothal that was declared here without deceit or trickery. This will complete our lawful match." "By the law," Gunnar proclaimed, "we name witnesses that Gimle has betrothed herself to me, Gunnar Hjorvardsson, lawfully. I will give you the counter-dowry with a handshake to seal the agreement as the fulfillment and performance of the complete contract that was declared between us just a moment ago." One of Gunnar's uncles laughingly said to him, "You know, Gunnar, that breaking a betrothal by either party is punishable. Whichever party breaks off the match forfeits the dowry that was promised." Without hesitation, Gunnar and Gimle, who were standing side by side, replied, "We have no fear of that." Stennar addressed Gunnar, "Gimle has no blemishes on her person. If you find any faults or blemishes that I have not informed you of, it's because I'm unaware of them. Her mother, as you know, has passed away, and she was the one who could tell. Gimle herself has declared that she has no blemish. If she does, you can refuse to marry her, and if you can prove that I knew it, you may claim the dowry according to law." All parties went their separate ways, feeling happy about the betrothal. After Gunnar's kinsman had left, Stennar sat alone with his daughter and said, "Daughter, you believe that Gunnar is perfect. Shortly after you marry him, you may find that he has faults. You might regret not marrying Thorstein, who, like Gunnar, loved you and silently aspired to your hand. But I assure you that if you had married Thorstein, you would find a fault in him too. No man, no matter how good and brave, is without fault. Be content, even if there are flaws in Gunnar. As we age, the illusions we hold about our lovers dissolve. The Nornir have a way of knowing, and we cannot predict our destinies." The next day, Gunnar, accompanied by the most esteemed men of Hrafn and the kinsmen of Ingun, approached Stennar with a request to marry Agnetha to Ingun. The powerful Hreidar of Fylkir considered their request and replied, "I had already promised my daughter's hand to another man, unaware of the love between Ingun and Agnetha. I hold Ingun in high esteem, for his valiance is admirable. He fights to defend our land, and his lineage descends from Odin. This union is wise." The marriage conditions and the length of the engagement were set before witnesses. Sigmund was also engaged under the same circumstances, and for the same length of time with Solveig, leaving Sigbrit, the youngest of the Raudasandur brothers, without a pledged partner. Chapter 29. Gunnar's duel with Arnbjorn. 2 days had passed since the conclusion of the games, and Stennar hosted a grand feast for his kinsmen and all the high-born men and women who had gathered in Uppsalir to witness the contests. The 3 spacious halls buzzed with guests, and with so many warriors of equal rank and honour, lots were drawn to determine their seats. During the revelry, Stennar publicly announced the betrothals of his children, Gunnar and Gimle, Ingun and Agnetha, and even Solveig and Sigmund by her father Bjorn. The wedding of Gunnar and Gimle was the first to take place, and all the Hersirs and many of the high-born were invited to attend. However, when Bui heard of Agnetha's betrothal to Ingun, he remembered the vow he had made during the previous Yule, and so, during the height of the feast, Bui boldly entered the hall and approached Stennar. He reminded the Hreidar of Fylkir of his vow regarding Agnetha, and requested her hand in marriage. Before Stennar could respond, Ingun stepped forward and claimed that he was already betrothed to Agnetha. He reminded everyone of his contributions to the realm, his betrothal to Agnetha, and his vow to marry her. In a heated exchange, Ingun also suggested that it would be better for the land to be rid of Bui and his 12 brothers. Turning to Agnetha, the Hreidar of Fylkir asked for her answer. Agnetha spoke with firmness in her voice. "I am promised to Ingun, and my heart belongs to him. I shall never marry another, for he is a man of honour and bravery. The rumours regarding Bui and his brothers cause me much concern. Furthermore, the Fylkja visited me in a dream and warned me of the dangers of the 12 sons of Hervard. Bui heard her words and issued a challenge to Ingun. In front of all the guests, he proclaimed that Ingun would be deemed a coward if he married Agnetha without accepting the challenge. Ingun responded with scorn, accepting the challenge and declaring the island of Samsi as the location for the duel. But before the duel, a powerful warrior named Arnbjorn arrived and challenged Gunnar for the hand of Gimle, daughter of Steinar. Arnbjorn had missed the games due to unfavorable winds, but he had come ready to fight for Gimle's hand. He vowed to marry her, and forbade any other man from doing so before defeating him in a duel. Arnbjorn shouted for all to hear that Gunnar would be considered a cowardly Nithing if he failed to show up for the duel on the first day of Yule. Gunnar accepted Arnbjorn's challenge, and at Arhaug, the two of them and their man-made sacrifices. Arnbjorn was known to practice witchcraft, and many believed that his chain armor was impenetrable. He only worshipped the sun and his guardian spirits, and rejected belief in Odin and the other gods. After the celebrations were over, Gunnar and his Raudasandur brothers left Fylkir along with all the guests, having received generous gifts. After Bui's challenge to Ingunn, the sons of Hervard left in a sour mood. Their mission concerning Agnetha had failed. When they got back, they informed their father of the events that occurred, and Bui's challenge to Ingunn. Hervard responded with anxiety, saying he had never been so worried about them before. He did not know of any men as skilled in handling weapons as Gunnar and his brothers, Ingunn, Sigbrit, and Sigmund. They did not speak of the matter any more that night, but Hervard's worried expression spoke volumes about his concern for the duel and the safety of his sons. After Ingunn's departure, Agnetha became inconsolably sad. Her lavish home had no allure, and she could only think about the duel between Ingunn and Bui. One night, when her father was alone, he saw her enter the hall, her skin ashen. Noticing her sadness, in a kind and understanding voice, he asked her to sit beside him. Agnetha tried to conceal her feelings, but Steinar could tell something was wrong. Sitting next to her father, Agnetha then rested her head on his chest, her face hidden under the cloak. Steinar held her hot and feverish hands, and asked if she was unhappy with the arranged marriage to Ingunn, or regretted her betrothal. He received only sobs as an answer, but after letting out her emotions in tears, she responded, "Father, I am content, and no one else but Ingunn would make me happy. But I don't know why, but I feel like I won't see him alive again." Steinar asked, "Why do you think that?" "I had a dream before the games," Agnetha replied. "In my dream our Fylkja appeared and warned me of Ingunn being in grave danger. She also told me about the 12 eagles in my previous dream, which were the 12 sons of Hervard, predicting that they would bring me great sorrow. Then she called me towards her and said, 'Follow me.' I believe my dream foretells Ingunn's death, and possibly mine too. The decree of the Nornir must be fulfilled, and none of us knows what it is." Steinar tried to console his daughter and convince her not to interpret her dream negatively. It was a challenging task to comfort her. Gimle was also concerned about the outcome of the duel between Gunnar and Arnbjorn. There was no way to stop these duels, however, and the time for that between Gunnar and Arnbjorn was quickly approaching. Gunnar prepared 2 ships and called upon many courageous champions to join him. He also invited men of high reputation to witness the duel at Arhaug. They would be able to return to Uppsalir and share the news of his triumph, or honorably die. He sailed for Arhaug, where he arrived 3 days before the due date with his Raudasandur brothers. Bodmod, Arnbjorn's son, welcomed him to his hall and entertained him with great pomp. During their conversation, Gunnar mentioned the name of Odin. At the mention of Odin, Bodmod became infuriated and sang, "Odin, I have never worshipped, though I have lived long. I know that the head of Gunnar will fall sooner than mine or that of my father." But Gunnar responded with a song, "I love Odin and all the gods, and sacrifice to them. I know that Odin loves me too." On the scheduled day of the duel, Gunnar and his Raudasandur brothers took a boat and rowed towards a tiny island where the conflict would take place. Arnbjorn was already there, waiting for him. A large group had gathered on the mainland's shore, eager to witness the test or ordeal between the 2 renowned champions, as people believed that the gods would decide the judgment in this way. Arnbjorn asked Gunnar what kind of duel he preferred, the Holmganga or the Einvigi. Gunnar, being the challenged one, had the right to choose which one he wanted. He replied that he would go with the Holmganga, as it had more honor and fame than the other. Gunnar hoped to win more fame than he had before, when he left Hrafen for Uppsalir to participate in the games. He believed that there were 2 outcomes for him. Either he would get the victory bravely by defeating Arnbjorn, or he would fall with valor, which was better than living with shame and dishonor. Arnbjorn was surprised by his choice, and asked why he chose the Holmganga over the Einvigi. Gunnar replied that he wouldn't fight better in the Einvigi, and he wished to take a risk with Holmganga where they would be on equal footing. Although he was much younger than Arnbjorn and less experienced, he wasn't afraid of the Holmganga rules. His Raudasandur father had taught him well about the rules of dueling and how to use the sword. Before the duel, Sigbrit recited the laws of the Holmganga, which was a mandatory practice. The cloak used in the duel must be 10 feet long from one end to the other, with loops in the corners and pegs holding them down. The person who sets up the cloak must go towards the pegs, hold his earlobes, and bend over to stand with his feet apart, seeing the sky between them. 3 one-foot-wide squares must be marked around the cloak, with 4 hazel poles placed outside the squares. The place is called a hazelled field when it is prepared in this way. Each man must have 3 shields, and once these are rendered useless, they must stand on the cloak and defend themselves with their weapons. The Holmganga law was clear: strike first or be struck. If a fighter was wounded and his cloak became blood-stained, he was no longer obligated to continue. 1 foot outside the boundary was seen as a retreat, while both feet meant that one had fled and therefore had lost the duel. Sigbrit questioned Arnbjorn and Gunnar about their knowledge of these laws before their Holmganga duel. As was customary, a shield-bearer stood in front of each combatant. The one who received the most wounds would pay an indemnity to be released from the fight. If the challenger won, he was given his desired prize. But if he lost, he had to release himself from the fight with a previously agreed-upon amount. If he died, his property was forfeited to the victor. No swords were drawn on the field, but they were kept at the ready hanging from the fighter's arm. When Arnbjorn questioned the length of Gunnar's sword, Gunnar defended its specification. Gunnar's brother Ingunn was hesitant to hold the shield for him. He didn't want to part with his brother or risk his safety. But Gunnar convinced him, and Ingunn held the shield for his Raudasandur brother. In the event of Gunnar's death, the Raudasandur brothers vowed to avenge him, as they had sworn to do for each other. He approached Gunnar and took the 3 shields he was to hold before him. Sigbrit and Sigmund each took one of the shields he handed over to them. Looking squarely at Gunnar, he said, "Raudasandur, brother, let us hope that victory will be yours. But know that you have to fight one of the greatest champions of our land, a man extremely skilled in handling the sword and the sax. Now it is better to stand by one's word and not to be the first to ask for peace," Arnbjorn said. "You are right," replied Gunnar. Then he sang, "Lovely maid of Filkir, today I fight for you. I will come to you victorious, Gimle. Today Arnbjorn will die." Arnbjorn began to shout fiercely, and the berserk frenzy took over him. He bit the rim of his shield, looking like a wild beast, and foam came from his mouth. After a while, however, he became himself again. Gunnar and Arnbjorn shook hands, placed themselves on the squares marked on the cloak, and went inside the boundaries of the dueling place. Ingunn held the shield of Gunnar, and Bodmod held Arnbjorn's shield. Gunnar had the sword Hrotti, and when it struck Arnbjorn's shield, it was as if lightning came from it. Arnbjorn, seeing the sparks, said, "I should not have fought against you if I had known that you had Hrotti with you. It is most likely, as my father said, that we brothers are to be short-lived, except the one of us who is named after him." Despite Arnbjorn's complaints, Gunnar struck at his shield, landing blow after blow so quickly that Arnbjorn could not strike him back. He had to shelter himself behind his shield-bearer. Gunnar then drew back to get enough room to wield his sword and aim at Arnbjorn. But Arnbjorn was too quick for him, and Gunnar's shield was cut asunder. New shields were provided, and these were equally cut to pieces. Each side had now spoiled 2 shields, and both combatants had only 1 shield left. They had reached the decisive point of the fight. The clash was fierce, with the 2 warriors locked in a deadly dance. Arnbjorn's voice rose above the fray, singing out his bravery. "Arnbjorn is fearless," he sang. "My sword Hviting will prove Odin wrong. Gunnar, do not trust me. Ready your arms, for soon you shall fall." Gunnar's response was swift and confident. "It is you who will fall, Arnbjorn," he shouted. With those words, Arnbjorn drew back, his sword poised to deliver a fatal blow. However, at that moment, Gunnar sprang forward, striking Arnbjorn with a heavy blow. The sword sliced through his shoulder, and he stumbled backwards, falling to the ground. Arnbjorn fought valiantly, but he would fight no more. According to tradition, Gunnar led a large bull forward, sacrificing it as an offering to the gods. Gunnar returned to Dampstadir, while the Sviar marched to Uppsalir to tell Gimle of his great victory. The tale of his bravery spread far and wide, ensuring his place in the annals of history. Chapter 30. Death of Ingunn and Agnetha. After returning from Arhaug and his unforgettable duel with Arnbjorn, Gunnar wasted no time in preparing to leave Dampstadir with his 3 Raudasandur brothers. Their destination was Samsey, where the highly anticipated duel between Ingunn and Bui was set to take place. Before setting sail, Ingunn conducted a sacred sacrifice to Odin, praying for success in the upcoming battle. The brothers embarked on their journey with 2 small ships known as asks, and arrived at Munarvog Bay on the island without incident. Meanwhile, the sons of Hervard were also making their preparations. The night before they were to set sail, Thorgrim had a troubling dream that he shared with his father. "In my dream," he began, "we the brothers were on Samsey and came across a flock of birds. We killed them all, and then went to the other side of the island. There 2 eagles attacked us. I had a fierce battle with one of them, and we both ended up badly wounded. The other eagle defeated my brothers." Upon hearing this, Hervard became increasingly concerned for his sons' safety, interpreting the dream as a premonition of their deaths. He warned them of the potential danger, but his sons brushed it off as they had always emerged victorious from their previous battles. Hervard persisted, reminding them that everyone will meet their fate eventually. The next morning, the 12 brothers boarded their ship, and Hervard offered them the best armor and weapons available, knowing they were about to face formidable adversaries. He bid them farewell, and they departed for Samsey, landing at Unavog Bay on the opposite side of the island from where Ingunn and his men were waiting. After Hervard's sons made landfall, a wild fury overtook them. They grappled with trees, rocks, and boulders, as was their habit when this madness gripped them. Eventually the berserker rage subsided and they rested, weakened as always by its aftermath. Come morning, they scoured the island for any sign of Ingunn and his kin. On the opposite coast, they spotted 2 ships and recognized them as Ingunn's. The berserker fury seized them once again, and they charged the vessels with swords drawn, biting the edges of their shields. 6 assailants per ship tore into the centers of the vessels, while the remaining 6 split between the bow and stern, dispatching anyone who crossed their path. With their job done, they howled and shouted their triumph. Ingunn and his Raudasandur brothers had been ashore, seeking Hervard's sons. From a nearby knoll, they spotted men exiting from their ships, their weapons and swords besmirched with gore. They recognized Hervard's sons immediately. "Alas," said Ingunn to his brothers, "our men are slain. They were skilled with weapons and fearless, making it likely that we'll be joining Odin in Valhalla tonight." His brothers wondered at Ingunn's only instance of cowardice. Had he foreseen the faithlessness of his Disir? Upon hearing this, Gunnar reassured Ingunn, "Courage can overcome even the sharpest sword, and a dull blade may still triumph. We'll prove victorious over Hervard's sons, even if they've already slain our bravest men." "We will not flee from our foes," declared Sigbrit, with a voice strong with conviction. "We will face them with honor and fight the berserks one by one, even if it means our demise. To live with shame is worse than to die with honor." Ingunn joined in, his voice unwavering. "I refuse to rest in Odin's hall tonight. Before I die, I must wed Agnetha, and by evening all our foes will be vanquished, and we 4 Raudasandur brothers shall live to tell the tale." With that, the sons of the berserk Hervard and the Raudasandur brothers met for the Einvigi, a brutal duel where no shield was held before the combatants. Bui wielded the mighty sword called Rangvid, while Ingunn carried Dragvandil, the blade passed down from his father that he received as a rite of passage. As they clashed, Bui spoke a grim vow. "If I die, let Rangvid be buried with me in my mound. Ingunn can have my shirt and weapons, and may the survivor raise a mound over the fallen." They fought fiercely, neither warrior giving an inch. But soon Gunnar, Sigbrit, and Sigmund turned their attention to the 11 other sons of Hervard, preparing for battle. Gunnar addressed the berserks with a stern warning. "We will not fight like thralls, but with the honor of warriors. You shall face me one at a time if your bravery holds." The berserks agreed, and Seming stepped forward to face Gunnar. The sword in Gunnar's hand, Hrotti, was a magnificent weapon, able to slice effortlessly through steel. In no time, Seming lay dead on the field. Olvir took his place, but he too fell to Gunnar's deadly skill. Enraged by their sudden defeat, the berserks struggled to keep their composure. No longer victors, they prepared to fight with every ounce of their strength, never giving up until the bitter end. Gisli stepped forward. Among the 11 brothers, he was second only to Thorgrim in strength and skill. He launched a furious attack on Gunnar, who initially struggled to defend himself. The battle raged on, the outcome uncertain. Both combatants soon shed their armor except for Gunnar, whose enchanted shirt was crafted by Gimle to protect him from harm. Despite receiving numerous wounds, Gisli fell at last. Thorgrim then stepped up to challenge Gunnar in a brutal and protracted fight that ended with Thorgrim suffering too much blood loss and dying suddenly. As each brother took his turn facing off against Gunnar, he managed to defeat them all, though he was almost completely spent. He had declined assistance from Sigbrit and Sigmund, knowing that victory over Hervard's sons would be easier for him than for them, and unwilling to put their lives at risk. Afterward, the Raudasandur brothers returned to the place where Bui and Ingun were still fighting. Bui lay motionless on the ground while Ingun leaned against a rock, looking as pale as a corpse. Gunnar approached Ingun and asked him what was wrong, noting that he looked weakened by deep wounds. Ingun replied weakly that he had 16 wounds, and his chain armor had been pierced close to his heart. The sword of Bui had struck him, the poisonous point hardening in his flesh. He owned 5 towns, but was unable to enjoy them, as he had little interest in occupying land. He knew he was soon to depart for Valhalla, and wished that he could have married Agnetha before going to Odin. But the Nornir had decided long ago that this was not to happen. He had left young Agnetha behind, never to see her again. He mused that sometimes it is better for a man to not know his fate. Ingun called Gunnar to his side, and instructed him to take the red gold ring from his hand and give it to Agnetha. He knew that his absence would cause her great sorrow. With a slight pause, he continued to speak, emphasizing that the women on land should not hear of his cowardice in battle. He wished for the wise maidens in Uppsalir to not mock him for succumbing to his adversary, whom he had defeated. Ingun then asked Gunnar to look up at the sky and tell him if he saw a raven flying from the east. An eagle would follow, which would ultimately prey on him and taste his blood. He requested that Gunnar carry his helmet and chain armor into Stennar's hall, where the Hreidar of Fylkir's daughter would see the mark of his bravery. He spoke of the beauty of the daughters of Stennar, and regretted not being able to be with them again, nor cheer the warriors with ale and speeches in the hall. Despite his intense suffering from wounds, Ingun refused to scream in pain. He made a vow never to do so, and instead asked 2 of his Raudasandur brothers to carve a stone coffin for him, while one stayed by his side to write the song about his life on wooden tablets. As Sigmund began carving the song, Ingun's voice faded away and he died surrounded by his brothers. Gunnar spoke solemnly, praising Ingun's nobility and fame, and the brothers mourned deeply for their loss. They placed the berserks in a heap near the sea, leaving them with all of their clothing and weapons. They covered the pile with boughs and turf, raising a great mound for their fallen brethren. The brothers then went to their ships to retrieve the fallen, creating another mound over them as a final resting place. After the berserks were buried, the 3 brothers of Raudasandur carried Ingun's body on their ship and set sail for Fylkir. They landed not far from Uppsalir, with Gunnar shouldering Ingun's lifeless form, followed by Sigbrit and Sigmund. As they walked to the great hall, they chanted the praises of Ingun, recalling his valorous deeds. Entering the hall, they approached Stennar, who was seated high up, and Ingun's pierced armor, sword, helmet, and shield laid before him. These symbols spoke volumes of the tragic fate of the brave Ingun. Gunnar and his brothers then went to Agnetha's bower, where she was embroidering Ingun's cloak and reminiscing about him. Gunnar reminded her of Ingun's heroic achievements, and then broke the sad news of his death. He handed her the ring she had given to Ingun, and told her of the dying Ingun's heartfelt greetings he had sent her. Agnetha took the ring, and her face turned pale, realizing Ingun was gone forever. She sat still and motionless in her chair for so long that her attendants thought she had died. Eventually she breathed her last. Gunnar, however, was not saddened by her passing, saying it was the best thing that had happened in a long time. Gunnar carried Agnetha to the door of the hall and laid her in the arms of Ingun's corpse. Going back to the hall, he informed Stennar of his daughter's death. The old man came out and saw the heart-breaking scene before him, mourning deeply the loss of his daughter and Ingun. The 2 were laid to rest in a large mortuary chamber with a soft feather bed and a pillow upon which to rest their heads. Since the death of Frey, many had been spared from the burning journey to the afterlife. Ingun was adorned in his finest war attire, a pierced armor, shield placed on his breast, and sword by his side. Agnetha was dressed in a white bridal gown that was meant for her wedding day, adorned with lavish jewels. Together they lay peacefully in death, side by side. A high mound was constructed upon them, and up to this day it sits upon the granite shores of the Baltic, overlooking the ships that sailed to and fro on the sea they both cherished. The wind and murmurs of the waves sing a requiem over them, and every June soft and fragrant breezes pass over their resting place, flitting with bees and butterflies that rejoice in the sunshine of new life. Birds sing their love songs by their side, just as Ingunn and Agnetha sang theirs. We are born, we grow, we love, and we die. Love is the most precious gift bestowed upon us, followed by friendship, the Raudasandur brother of love. Agnetha awaits to live with the virgin goddess Gefjon, where all maidens who have passed wait to be with her. Ingunn went to Valhalla and sees his beloved every day. Gunnar, Sigbrit, and Sigmund greatly mourned the death of Ingunn. Within memory, there have never been four men more attached to one another. Their irreparable loss was felt for a long time, but as the years passed, time assuaged their sorrows. The remembrance of Ingunn's noble qualities would cheer them up, and on every sacrifice and feast when they drank to the memory of departed kinsmen, they would always remember the name of Ingunn the Brave. To this day people love to recount the tale of Ingunn and Agnetha. Chapter 31. The Wedding of Gunnar and Gimle. About a year had passed since the sombre events that had occurred, and the day of Gunnar and Gimle's union was drawing near. The city of Uppsalir was in a frenzy of preparations for their wedding day. Costly tapestries, meticulously embroidered by the noble wives and daughters of the Hersirs of Fylkir, were taken out from their sacred storage rooms. These tapestries were only used to adorn the halls on such joyous occasions. The scenes depicted in many of them were romantic episodes from the maiden's own courtship. The bridal bench, exquisitely ornamented with gold and silver and intricate carvings, was also brought out. How many beautiful daughters of the Hersirs of Fylkir had sat upon that bench since the inception of Uppsalir? The list of illustrious maidens was endless, and the stories of the generations descended from them were equally diverse. Their characters and temperaments showed a remarkable range, an undeniable testament to their lineage. But despite the grandeur of their lives, many of these young hearts were left unfulfilled. Their unions did not always turn out as congenial and happy as they had hoped. The girls' visions and dreams, so essential to their youth, were often left unfulfilled. The Nornir, spinning their threads of fate, had cast a thick mist over their futures, leaving many disillusioned. Some had found that fame, wealth, power, and position did not bring happiness and success. They longed for the simple pleasures of life, envying the laughter that emanated from humble dwellings, and even from that of the slaves. 2 weeks before the wedding day, guests started to arrive in great numbers, pouring into the city from all over the world. Hersirs from Gardariki, Holmgard, Fien, Zealand, and Norway's Herods were all received with great honour. Each high-born guest was given a spacious and lavishly furnished home, with devoted servants ready to cater to their every need. 4 days before the wedding, Gunnar and a sizable entourage of well-born men arrived in the city. Finally, the day arrived, and all the guests gathered in the grand hall. Gimle, adorned in snowy bridal linen, made her entrance through the woman's door. She was followed by her bridesmaids, all eager to participate in the celebration of love and happiness. Her stunning features were only faintly visible through the sheer veil which was expertly fastened to her head with a breathtaking jewel. A necklace of sparkling gold beads rested upon her neck, its intricate design revealing the mastery of the artist who had crafted it. Her belt, also made of gold, held a cluster of keys, a clear symbol of her authority over Gunnar's household. With regal poise, she glided towards the bridal platform and sat down amidst her 10 bridesmaids. The bridesmaids bore the names of Alfhild, Thora, Hildegerd, Svanhild, Randgrid, Gerlaug, Hildegunn, Ingigerd, Sigrid, and Thorhalla. Alfhild sat to the right of the radiant bride, while Thora sat on her left. Hildegunn and Svanhild sat in between with the others, following according to their social status. Properly seating them was a matter of utmost importance, as women were notorious for their fussiness on such matters. Improper seating would be considered a personal insult. The groom arrived next, accompanied by his groomsmen. Among them were Sigbrit and Sigmund, Gunnar's 2 Raudasandur brothers, Thorbrand, Alfhild's brother, Thord, Thora's brother, Geir, Hildegunn's brother, Skeggi, Svanhild's brother, Ingolf, Gerbaug's cousin, Ali the Bold, and Hunding, Hror, and Bard, all of them powerful Vikings. Gunnar then took his place on the high seat opposite his bride, with Sigbrit to his left and Sigmund to his right. Thorbrand and Thord came next and took their places, followed by the others. The decision to grant priority to Sigbrit and Sigmund was unanimous, not because they outranked others, but rather due to the deep bond they shared with Gunnar, having faced numerous challenges together. On Stenar's side, the most prominent herseers in the land were present, and many lots were drawn amongst equals to decide their seats of honour. The scene was a breathtaking display of opulence. The women were adorned in the most magnificent apparel, each one seeking to outshine the other in the extravagance of their gowns and the lustre of their gems. As they made their way into the hall, they shed their festive cloaks, which were embroidered with gold, and revealed their breathtaking ensembles. Every woman donned the slödur, a ceremonial gown that trailed down to the ground in a magnificent train. These gowns were fashioned from the most expensive materials that could be sourced from the Caspian or Greece, and were richly adorned with gold and silver. The bodices of their dresses, in many cases, were designed to leave their shoulders bare, and a gimpe of pale blue or snowy white silk covered that area, highlighting their immaculate milky white skin. Some wore wide, dangling collars, almost masking their necks, that were embroidered with elaborate patterns in gold. The married females were distinguished by graceful headwear, and their silk shoelaces were meticulously embroidered, rising almost up to their knees. Their women wore their hair in various unique ways. Some had their locks twisted up into an enormous topknot, secured with long, ornate hairpins made of gold or silver, while others preferred to push their hair back, knotting it loosely and tying it up with a gold ribbon. Almost every woman sported gold diadems on their foreheads, and they draped themselves in necklaces made of mosaic, gold beads, or ancient Roman coins, separated by long golden-shaped beads. Graceful golden bracelets, most of them spiraled, adorned their arms, and there were numerous rings on their fingers. They wore golden belts, contrasting with their dresses, which accentuated their slender waists. Attached to these belts were velvet pouches embellished with gold for carrying small personal items. Even the male guests were richly garbed. Gunnar's groomsmen were dressed in the most luxurious attire, each one flaunting a cloak that signified their status and rank. Stenar, the high priest of the temple, then consecrated and united Gimle and Gunnar by performing the symbol of the hammer of Thor on them and invoking the goddess Var, who had heard and acknowledged their vows. Following this sacred ritual, Gimle was now declared holy as Gunnar's wife in the eyes of all men. The ceremony had ended, and the bridegroom approached Gimle, presenting her with the linfi, or trousseau. It consisted of beautiful bracelets, necklaces, and diadems made of the finest gold, numerous mantles of varying colours, as well as various headdresses, gloves, shoes, silk and linen underwear, and long-sleeved nightgowns made from the finest linen known to the land, were also included. Some of the materials were made from silk that Gunnar had brought back from the shores of the Caspian. Following the ceremony, the bridal bench gifts were given. Each guest presented their gift to the bride while she sat on the bench. There was a long procession of beautiful presents given to Gimle, one after another. An old great-aunt from the island of Fien gave her a gold coin issued during the reign of Tiberius, the Roman emperor from 14 to 37 AD, which had been in the possession of her ancestors during the time of the emperor. Another aunt sent a gold coin from the time of Claudius, 41 to 54 AD, which had been in the possession of her kinsman ever since. One of the many gifts from Sigerlin, Gunnar's mother, was a gold coin from the time of Titus, 79 to 81 AD, obtained by Sverrir's ancestors in the Mediterranean when Titus took Jerusalem. A cousin gave her a gold coin from the time of Decius, 249 to 251 AD, and another a gold coin from the reign of Aurelian, 270 to 275 AD. An uncle of Gimli from southern Fylkir graciously gave her a gold coin minted during the reign of Probus, between 276 to 282 AD, which his son had given to him. The gifts also included many exquisite jewels, necklaces made from solid gold, diadems with Gimle's name inscribed in runic letters, spiral bracelets of gold, belts of gold and silver, beautiful hairpins of gold and silver with highly ornate tops, necklaces made from mosaic beads of great beauty, and bracteates with beautiful golden chains. Gurid, one of Gimle's aunts, sent her a woman's headgear delicately placed in a sophisticated velvet bag embroidered with gold. Sigbrit gifted her with vast quantities of Grecian fabrics and many golden jewelry pieces. Sigmund, on the other hand, gave the rarest glassware one can find in Greece or the island of Cyprus. Gudbrand, Ingun's father, provided her with numerous dishes made of gold and silver, while his wife Sigrid sent beautiful tapestries she had embroidered herself. Thora gifted Gimli with a stunning tapestry embroidered by Agnetha before her passing. The piece depicted Gunnar participating in ball games that had taken place the previous year, while Agnetha resided in Uppsalir. In the background, Stennar and the women watched intently. Gunhild, the youngest sister, presented Gimli with a gold-embroidered bag. Stennar, on the other hand, granted his daughter a splendid bench gift consisting of gold, silver, and valuable objects, along with 2 vast estates, one in present-day Courland and the other in Venden, in current Pomerania. The presents that Gimli received amounted to quite a significant fortune in gold and silver. After the bench gifts were given, the Hreidar of Fylkir left no stone unturned in his preparations for the wedding feast taking place soon after. New vats for beer and ale were made, and a considerable amount of ale, beer, and wine were brewed. The tables displayed dazzling magnificence. The 3 halls had a grand appearance, dressed with beautifully embroidered tablecloths and embellished with costly Grecian and Cypriot glasses. The dishes, featuring delectable cuisine, were served on plates made of gold and silver. The drinking horns, or vases, came in different varieties such as solid gold, ornamented silver, and plentiful Grecian cups made with cut glass. When night fell, light emanated from enormous wax candles. The great herseers in attendance kindly decided to rotate sitting on the high seats, easing Stennar's apprehension about a dispute erupting over precedence. There was a vast array of viands including beef, roast veal, pig, venison, birds, and fish. All the plates across the tables were presented in silver. Special attendants, referred to as fillers, were assigned to ensure the horns remained full and carried them around continuously. The crowd was so substantial that white, newly cropped woolen wadmal was worn by new slaves recruited for assistance. Among the female slaves were exceptionally beautiful ones from various places like Britain, Gaul, Greece, and Rome. They too were responsible for filling and carrying around the drinking horns. There was much revelry and libations poured out, and the gods were called upon to bless the occasion. The wedding lasted for 6 weeks, equivalent to a lunar cycle in our time. Poets declaimed their verses daily before enraptured crowds, and much like at athletic games, this grand feast triggered a flood of future nuptials, as many a man and woman fell madly in love with one another. None had ever seen a feast of such grandeur, and when it ended, guests left laden with opulent gifts. The moment arrived for Gimli to bid farewell to Uppsalir and embrace a new epoch in her life, leaving behind all the cherished memories of her youth. She had yet to realize that her former carefree state was gone forever. So bright had her youth been that she had thought it would last until the end of her days. She had Gunnar by her side and believed that happiness would be hers forever. Skuld had kept hidden from her the challenges lurking in the future. She had no inkling of the stormy seas that awaited her, or the hardships that afflicted all mortals. Gunnar was everything to her, and she was willing to sacrifice even her own life for him. Love was her all. Oh, Skuld, how merciful of you to veil the inexorable decrees of the Norns, those fates that shape our lives from birth. We come into this world without our consent, and we know not what destiny has in store for us when the sun rises each day. Gimli gazed optimistically into the future, seeing only promise and potential. Hope and the future, those twin sisters, shone brighter in her eyes than the noonday sun. Gunnar was hers, and they both belonged to love. The dragon ship that ferried Gunnar and Gimli to Dampstadir that day bore perhaps the most charming and stunning of brides, and the most handsome and valiant of grooms. The end.
This concludes Gunnar the Viking, Viking historical fiction, written by Bjorn Wolfe, narrated by R.K. Marks. Visit brooksaudiobooks.com for updates on the availability of new books and a special free offer.